What happens when a global celebrity walks onto a live television set thinking the rules don't apply to them, only to discover that one host refuses to be pushed around? It only took one comment about respect for everything to completely fall apart. This is the story of how Meghan Markle went from composed guest to furious hurricane in the span of a single interview on Piers Morgan's show, and how her own words became the very thing that got her escorted off the set. The morning started like any other for Piers Morgan. The studio lights were hot, the cameras were ready, and the producers were buzzing with excitement. They had landed one of the biggest interviews of the year. Meghan Markle, the Duchess who had walked away from royal life, was coming on the show to talk about her new projects and her life in America. Piers sat in his chair, shuffling through his notes. He knew this interview would get attention. Everything Meghan did got attention, but he also knew he had a job to do. Ask the tough questions. Don't let celebrities coast through with pre-approved talking points. Give the audience what they want, the truth. When Meghan walked onto the set, the audience clapped. She smiled and waved, her presence commanding the room like she owned it. She wore an expensive cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly styled, every detail calculated for maximum impact. "Meghan, welcome to the show," Piers said, standing to greet her with a handshake. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her voice warm but with an edge of caution. They sat down. The cameras started rolling. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. Piers asked about her life in California, her children, her charitable work. Meghan answered with practiced ease, speaking in smooth, media-trained sentences about finding peace and living authentically. But Piers wasn't interested in the surface-level conversation. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Let's talk about something people really want to know," he said. "You've been quite vocal about your experience with the British media, calling it toxic, unfair, even racist at times. But isn't it true that you courted that same media when it suited you? When you needed publicity for your projects?" Meghan's smile tightened. "I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it." "Is it, though?" Piers pressed. "You were happy to do magazine covers. Happy to have photographers follow you to charity events. But the moment the coverage turned critical, suddenly the media is the villain. Isn't that a bit convenient?" "That's not what happened," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. "There's a difference between working with the media professionally and being harassed, having lies printed about you, having your every move twisted into something negative. But who decides what's a lie and what's legitimate criticism?" Piers countered. "You've made very serious accusations about the royal family, about the institution, about racism. But when people question your version of events, you call it harassment. Don't you see how that looks to people?" Meghan shifted in her seat. "I lived through it. I know what happened. I don't need to justify my experience to anyone." "Well, actually, when you go on international television and make those claims, you do need to justify them," Piers said firmly. "You accused people of racism without naming them. You made the entire family look bad. And when they stayed silent, which is what the royals do, you took that silence as guilt. That's not fair, is it?" "I never said it was the entire family," Meghan shot back. "And I had every right to share my truth." "Your truth," Piers repeated, emphasizing the words. "That's an interesting phrase. Not the truth. Your truth. Which implies there are other truths, other perspectives that might be equally valid. But you don't seem interested in those, do you?" The tension in the studio was thick now. The audience sat in complete silence, watching the exchange like a tennis match. Meghan's jaw tightened. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like I'm on trial. I came here to talk about my work, my future, not to be attacked." "Attacked?" Piers laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm asking you questions. That's what journalists do. If you can't handle basic questions about things you've publicly discussed, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Maybe I shouldn't be doing interviews with people who clearly have an agenda against me, Meghan snapped. An agenda? Piers leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. My agenda is the truth. My agenda is asking the questions that millions of people want answered. You walked away from the royal family. You did an interview where you made explosive claims. You signed massive deals worth millions of dollars. And now, you want to control the narrative so tightly that anyone who asks a challenging question is the bad guy. That's not how this works. You don't know anything about what I went through, Meghan said, her voice shaking now with anger. You sit here in your comfortable studio, judging me, judging my choices, when you have no idea what it's like to be vilified every single day. Vilified? Piers raised his eyebrows. You live in a mansion in California. You have millions of dollars. You have a platform that most people would kill for. You're not a victim, Meghan. You're one of the most privileged people on the planet. And yet, you want everyone to feel sorry for you. I never asked for pity, Meghan said through gritted teeth. No, you just asked for everyone to believe your version of events without question. To accept that you're the innocent party, and everyone else is wrong. The media is wrong. The royal family is wrong. Anyone who criticizes you is wrong. Do you hear how that sounds? Meghan stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down, Piers said calmly. We're in the middle of an interview. No, Meghan said, her voice sharp. I'm done. This is ridiculous. You invited me here just to ambush me. I invited you here to have a conversation, Piers replied, his voice steady. A real conversation. Not a puff piece where I throw you softball questions and let you promote whatever you want. If you can't handle that, then yes, maybe you should leave. The audience gasped. No one moved. The cameras kept rolling. Meghan pointed a finger at Piers, her composure completely shattered now. You know what your problem is. You can't stand that I walked away. You can't stand that I chose my own happiness over what other people expected of me. It kills you that I have power now, that I don't need the approval of people like you. People like me? Piers said, his voice dangerously quiet. You mean people who don't bow down to you? People who treat you like any other public figure instead of royalty? That's what really bothers you, isn't it? You left the royal family, but you still want to be treated like a duchess. You want all the benefits and none of the scrutiny. You're twisting my words, Meghan said, her hands trembling. I'm not twisting anything. I'm holding up a mirror, and you don't like what you see. Meghan grabbed her microphone and pulled it off, the wire snapping as she yanked too hard. I'm not doing this. This is harassment. This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior I was talking about. Oh, please, Piers said, standing now too. Don't play the victim card again. You came on this show knowing exactly what kind of interviewer I am. You thought you could charm your way through it, control the conversation, make me look like the villain if I dared to push back. But it didn't work, did it? You're a bully, Meghan spat, a small, bitter man who gets off on tearing people down. The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members stopped moving. Piers stared at her, his expression unreadable. Get out, he said quietly. What? Meghan blinked. I said get out. Piers's voice was louder now, firm and commanding. You want to leave? Fine. Leave. But don't you dare come on my show, insult me, call me names, and then pretend you're the victim here. I asked you legitimate questions, questions that any journalist worth their salt would ask, and instead of answering them, you threw a tantrum. I'm not throwing a tantrum, Meghan protested, but her voice was shrill now, proving his point. You're standing in the middle of my studio, having ripped off your microphone, calling me a bully because I wouldn't let you control the interview. That's a tantrum, Meghan. That's what children do when they don't get their way. How dare you, Meghan said, her face flushed red. How dare I? Piers laughed. How dare you? You come here expecting special treatment, expecting me to nod along while you rewrite history and play the victim. And when I don't, when I actually do my job, you can't handle it. You talk about wanting respect, but you don't give any. You talk about the truth, oh, but you only want your version heard. You can't have it both ways. Meghan looked around the studio, as if searching for support from someone, anyone. But the crew just stared. The audience sat frozen. No one was coming to her rescue. "This interview is over," she said, trying to regain some dignity. "It's been over since you stood up," Piers replied. "Now either sit back down and finish this conversation like an adult, or leave. But make a choice and stick with it. Stop wavering." For a moment it seemed like Meghan might actually sit back down. Her hand went to the chair, but then her pride kicked in, and she straightened up. "I'm leaving," she announced loudly. "Then leave," Piers said, sitting back down in his chair. "The door's right there." But Meghan didn't move toward the door. Instead, she stood there, as if waiting for Piers to say something else, to try to convince her to stay. When he didn't, when he just sat there looking at her calmly, her anger flared even hotter. "You know what? You're everything that's wrong with journalism," she said. "Everything that's toxic about this industry. You don't care about truth. You care about ratings. You care about creating drama." Piers smiled. "And yet, here you are, giving me exactly what I want. A dramatic scene. A viral moment. You're doing my job for me, Meghan." That was the final straw. Meghan turned on her heel and started marching toward the exit. But before she could reach it, she spun back around. "You'll regret this," she said, pointing at him again. "Will I?" Piers asked, completely unfazed. "Or will you? Because tomorrow, people aren't going to be talking about how terrible I am. They're going to be talking about how you couldn't handle a simple interview, how you stormed off set like a diva, how you proved every criticism people have about you being entitled and unable to take accountability." "I don't have to take accountability for things I didn't do," Meghan shouted. "Then stop acting like you're above being questioned," Piers shouted back, his voice rising to match hers. "Stop acting like the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to you. Stop acting like asking you to back up your claims is somehow an attack on your character." "You don't get to tell me how to act," Meghan said. "And you don't get to come on my show and dictate the terms," Piers fired back. "This is my house. These are my rules. And rule number 1 is that everyone, no matter who they are, gets asked the hard questions. No exceptions. Not for you. Not for anyone." Meghan's chest was heaving now, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She looked like she wanted to say something else, something devastating that would put Piers in his place, but no words came, because deep down, she knew he was right. "Security," Piers called out, not taking his eyes off Meghan. "Please escort our guest out of the building." 2 large security guards appeared from the sides of the studio. They approached Meghan carefully, professionally. "Ma'am, we need you to leave the premises," one of them said gently. Meghan looked at them, then back at Piers, her eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes, it is," Piers replied. "It's very much over." The security guards moved closer, and Meghan finally started walking toward the exit. But every few steps, she would turn back, as if she couldn't quite believe this was actually happening, as if she expected Piers to call her back, to apologize, to beg her to return to her seat. He didn't. He just sat there, calm and collected, watching her leave. When she reached the door, she paused one last time. "You're making a huge mistake," she said. "The only mistake here was thinking you could come on this show and not be held accountable," Piers said. "Goodbye, Meghan." And with that, she was gone. The security guards followed her out, and the heavy studio door closed behind them with a definitive thud. The studio remained silent for several long seconds. The audience didn't know if they should clap or stay quiet. The crew didn't know if they should cut the cameras or keep rolling. Piers turned to face the main camera directly. "Well," he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "That was interesting." A nervous laugh rippled through the audience. "You just witnessed something that doesn't happen very often in television," Piers continued, his voice returning to its normal, measured tone. "You witnessed someone who is so used to getting their way, so used to being treated with kid gloves, that they literally cannot function when faced with basic scrutiny. And I want to be very clear about something." He paused, making sure every eye in the studio and every viewer at home was paying attention. "I did not attack Meghan Markle. I asked her questions. Questions about her public statements. Questions about her accusations. And questions that any reasonable person would want answered. And she couldn't handle it. Not because the questions were unfair, but because she's not used to being questioned at all." Piers leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. This is what happens when celebrities, when public figures, surround themselves with yes people, with handlers who tell them they're always right, with PR teams who craft perfect narratives. They lose touch with reality. They start to believe their own press releases. And when someone comes along and says, "Wait a minute, let's examine this. Let's look at the other side," they fall apart. He sat back again, spreading his hands. "I have interviewed prime ministers, presidents, actors, musicians, athletes. Some of those interviews were friendly. Some were contentious. But do you know what they all had in common? The guests stayed. They answered the questions, even the uncomfortable ones. They engaged in the conversation. Because that's what adults do. That's what professionals do." Piers shook his head slowly. "But not Meghan. No, she's special. She's above all that. Or at least she thinks she is. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem. Not with me. Not with the media. Not with the royal family. The problem is with someone who demands the world treat them as extraordinary while refusing to meet even ordinary standards of accountability." The audience started to clap, slowly at first, then building to a steady applause. Piers held up a hand. "Don't applaud me. I'm just doing my job. A job that apparently needs to be done more often, because we've gotten so used to softball interviews and celebrity worship that we've forgotten what real journalism looks like." He picked up his notes from the desk beside him and tapped them together. "We had a whole hour planned. We were going to talk about her podcast, her book deals, her plans for the future. But we didn't even make it 15 minutes. 15 minutes of honest questions was all it took for the mask to slip, for the carefully constructed image to crack. And what did we see underneath? Entitlement, anger, an inability to accept criticism or take responsibility." Piers looked directly into the camera again. "So to those of you watching at home who support Meghan, who think I was too hard on her, I want you to ask yourself something. If your truth is really the truth, if your story is really accurate, if your grievances are really justified, then why can't they withstand basic questions? Why does asking for evidence, or context, or alternative perspectives make someone a bully?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The answer is simple. Because when you're more interested in controlling the narrative than revealing the truth, questions are dangerous. They expose inconsistencies. They reveal exaggerations. They force you to confront the gap between the story you're telling and the reality of what happened. Piers stood up from his chair, adjusting his suit jacket. Meghan Markle came on this show because she wanted a platform. She wanted to reach an audience. She wanted to shape her image. And all of that would have been fine if she had been willing to engage in a real conversation. But she wasn't. She wanted a monologue, not a dialogue. She wanted a stage, not an interview. And when she didn't get what she wanted, she left. He walked a few steps toward the camera. Now, I'm sure her supporters will spin this. They'll say I was aggressive. They'll say I was disrespectful. They'll say I had it out for her from the start. But here's what they can't spin. the footage, the actual exchange. Anyone who watches this can see exactly what happened. They can judge for themselves who was reasonable and who wasn't, who stayed calm and who lost their temper, who asked questions and who refused to answer them. Piers stopped walking and stood still, his expression serious. This is why I do what I do. This is why I ask the hard questions, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Because the truth matters. Accountability matters. And if we let celebrities and public figures operate without scrutiny, if we let them make serious accusations without backing them up, if we treat them like they're above criticism, then we've failed as a society. The audience applauded again, louder this time. Piers nodded in acknowledgement. Thank you. But again, this isn't about me. This is about a bigger issue, an issue of entitlement, an issue of people believing that their status, their fame, their wealth somehow exempts them from the standards we apply to everyone else. He returned to his chair and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. You know what the saddest part of all this is? It didn't have to go this way. If Meghan had just answered the questions, even if she disagreed with the premise, even if she pushed back on my points, we could have had a productive conversation. A real conversation. The kind that actually illuminates truth, rather than obscures it. Piers picked up a pen from his desk and tapped it against his palm. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't set aside her ego long enough to engage. She couldn't accept that being questioned isn't the same as being attacked. She couldn't understand that pushback isn't persecution. And so instead of a conversation, we got a spectacle. Instead of answers, we got anger. Instead of accountability, we got accusations. He put the pen down. And here's what really gets me. Meghan talks about wanting privacy, about wanting to be left alone, about wanting to live a normal life. But then she does interview after interview. She signs deals worth millions to tell her story. She stays in the public eye constantly. You can't have it both ways. You can't demand privacy while actively seeking publicity. You can't complain about media intrusion while courting media attention. Piers spread his hands. It's the hypocrisy that bothers people, not her choices, not her leaving the royal family, not her moving to America. Those are all her decisions to make. But the hypocrisy of wanting the benefits of fame without the scrutiny, of wanting the platform without the questions, of wanting the sympathy without the accountability. That's what doesn't sit right. He leaned forward again, his voice becoming more passionate. And when people like me point out that hypocrisy, we're called bullies. We're called toxic. We're called everything except what we actually are, which is journalists doing our jobs, asking questions, seeking truth, holding powerful people accountable. Piers sat back, his expression thoughtful now. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. I've had my share of controversial interviews. I've had people walk off before, though not many. And every time it happens, I ask myself the same question. Did I go too far? Did I cross a line? Was I unfair? He paused, seeming to genuinely consider it. And every time, I come to the same conclusion. No, because asking tough questions isn't going too far. Challenging someone's narrative isn't crossing a line. Refusing to accept non-answers isn't being unfair. It's being thorough. It's being honest. It's being a journalist. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. So when Meghan stormed off this set, when she called me a bully and accused me of harassment, do I feel bad? No, I don't. Because I know what I did. I asked questions. That's it. Questions. And if that's enough to make someone flee, if that's enough to trigger a meltdown, then the problem isn't with the questions. It's with the person being asked. Piers stood up one more time, smoothing down his tie. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue with the rest of today's show. But I wanted to address what just happened head on, in real time, so there's no confusion about the facts. Meghan Markle had an opportunity to engage in substantive dialogue. She chose not to. She chose to leave. That was her decision, her choice, and she'll have to live with the consequences of that choice. He looked directly into the camera one last time, because unlike some people, I believe in consequences. I believe in accountability. And I believe that no one, no matter how famous, no matter how wealthy, no matter what title they once held, is above being asked to explain themselves. And with that final statement, Piers gave a small nod, and the studio lights dimmed as they cut to commercial.